I'm currently a PhD researcher at the Open University, although I live down here in Sussex. And what I really want to speak about, I think, in these few minutes is about writing as nourishment for activism, and how it leads you, writing can lead you to paths of destinations that are not known, that are exploratory and that are unique to every individual. I think it's taken me a long time as a mum of 4 kids to find, let's call it the spiritual muscle to do this work, because it's exhausting, it's traumatic, and it's emotional labour that strips you bare in a lot of ways when you're an activist as a way of surviving rather than just as a chosen path. As I was spun out of my comfy research job a couple of years ago, it had been a temporary research position for 3 years on temporary contracts, and I know that that's, as Nicola Rollock and Kawant Bhopal tell us, that is quite a normal thing for a black female in academia, to be on temporary, impermanent employment that is very unstable. But as I came out of that, I was lucky enough to be funded and supported by the Culture Capital Exchange to ask a question that had been running around in my mind for quite some years, and that was about equity, social, racial and environmental justice in higher education research. I was lucky enough to work with some amazing black female activist professors from both across the UK, United States and some in Europe, including Sadivi Dar and Deborah Brewer from the Building the Anti-Racist Curriculum, and also who wrote a joint paper about the Business School is Racist, Act Up. You can find it online. Also to work with Professor Michelle Berger, Women and Gender Studies at the University of Carolina, whose speculative fiction was really, really interesting, and people like Ro Everin from the Unlearn Project, Arinma Ochu, Manchester Met, massive activist within her university, as a scientist, but also as a digital and creative producer that works within her community as well and gives a huge amount of herself to her community. People like Dr. Kesia Thomas, who is the Dean of the University of Alabama, Birmingham College of Arts and Sciences, and was very much interested in organisational readiness for equity. Are our organisations ready? Will they ever be ready? And then now my own Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the Open University, Marcia Wilson, who is trying to turn a whole institution around in the way it thinks about not D&I or EDI or whatever we want to call it, but actually about equity, about representation, not just about inclusion. And so having a chance to listen to and work with these people, a lot of what came out of it was a sense of it's very hard to belong in academia. It's very hard to feel comfortable. It's very hard to feel settled and welcomed. I contacted the Ref 21, which is part of the big research scheme within higher education. I contacted the Ref 21 Equality Committee, to ask them about this question, and was sent a huge amount of documentation, beautifully printed, wonderfully presented, and it was data, a lot of it about protected characteristics and movement in EDI that was considered to be doing work. And as I read it, I kind of felt the air being sucked out of my body. It was a sense of, this is doing the work without doing the work. This is creating work that doesn't actually change anything, but makes people feel they're being busy. And it's done with, let's say, good intentions, but what it does is mean that nothing changes. That was a real concern to me. My response was to write a poem, because to respond with the same language is useless. This poem is online. I'd be really happy for people to read it. You'll find it on the Culture Capital Exchange website and on my own Twitter feed. But it's, let's call it an epic, speculative, poetic response to documentation that makes you stand still and doesn't ever allow you to grow and move. And one of the things that it did also do is it allowed me to acknowledge the collective wisdom that was coming from these others. And this is not only the people that I read, like a lot of us here, you know, the Angela Davies and bell hooks and, Stella Dadsey and all of those authors that we read, you know, religiously as part of how we maintain our energy, but it also let me to speak the truth of and also acknowledge the existence of those people that I'd been working with and speaking with, and also who had very much influenced my own work. So a 20-page poem now exists as a response to the UKRI, and a lot of that was written up on the South Downs because I really needed space and air to kind of think about how I wanted to respond. It's also an ongoing lengthy response because my PhD now is part of that activism, and I consider myself to now be in a position where my PhD has allowed me to connect with amazing black feminist activist historians that are also PhDs, and some are professors, people like Dr. Sabine Cadeau and Dr. Peggy Brunache and Miranda Lowe, who's at the Natural History Museum, and Dr. Temi Odudumu, who themselves are also part of this movement that is growing and speaks to the visibility of especially black women who historically colonial practices have erased or have obscured or have silenced. So within my PhD now I feel that, and I'm writing about the legacies of black transnational feminist activism in relation to black British women's radical activism during the Cold War period. So it feels big at the minute, it'll most definitely get smaller. I'm establishing a black feminist historiography that's for myself, but also is hopefully laying pathways that others can come behind me, not the broken pipeline, but pathways that people can traverse into academia to create their own pathways as well, and then to feel that this is a place where they belong and that we have created a tradition of scholarly excellence, which we know exists, but which is often fragmented. And yeah, I consider that to be part of how I tap into my own sort of broken indigenous and ancestral connection, with a sense to a kind of a spiral approach to knowledge, where you begin in the centre with a sense of birth and you move outwards from the spiral as you learn, and then you unlearn as you come back in through the spiral to a centre again, to consider and do deep reflection in a way that is not harmful either to yourself or others, and definitely not harmful to a planet and, let's say, the whole community of life. So yeah, that's sort of where I am at the moment, and we'll see. Thank you.